So this video is what advice would you give to a psychologist trying to help someone with your kind of experiences? And I'm going to count down from 5, like an award. Number 5 is be ready to have a laugh with your clients, because sometimes really funny things happen in quite inappropriate situations and you really just have to laugh. And also because it's, for me, taking the piss a bit is kind of a way of taking what is, like, letting me take what's useful from the system while distancing myself from the bits that really aren't very helpful. And I do that through drawing quite silly cartoons about mental health. And when I first started drawing those, it was in an art therapy group, and I thought that the therapist was gonna just, like, I was kind of waiting for her to tell me off. I think that was part of it. I was kind of challenging her and seeing how far I could push it. And then when she didn't tell me to sit down and do some proper work, then that was like, that broke through a bit of a barrier. That was really when I started to actually engage and trust her, when I saw that she actually kind of got my humour. So that's quite important. Number 4, meet people where they're at before trying to move them forwards. Like, so what I mean by that is, when I'm feeling really hopeless and like there is just nothing that's going to make it better, like sometimes all of the skills that you can learn to regulate your emotions and all of the things that you can try, just sometimes none of them work. And sometimes what I need in that situation is someone to say, I know this is shit and I know that you don't feel like anything is going to get any better, and to acknowledge that and hold that hopelessness and just let me feel that way if that's where things are, before pushing me to change it if I'm not ready to. So number 3, advocate for your clients personally and politically. So on a personal level, you hear a lot when you spend a lot of time floating around the mental health system about service user involvement and people being engaged in their own care, and people like co-production, people co-producing care plans. But there is a massive power imbalance between people using services and people providing them. And even though people providing services might also be using them in another context, and people using services might also be providing them in another context, when you are in the role of service user, you have so little power. And the weight of the words of the professionals working with you, my experience is that will always carry more weight than the words I use about myself. I think sometimes I need my care coordinator, who is a psychologist, to advocate for me. And I also think, in political terms, I spend a lot of time on activism and on pushing for things like the benefit system to be less excruciatingly painful and humiliating, and for services to be more effective and to take account of people's needs more. And I'm happy to do that. That's part of who I am and part of who I want to be. But it is very, very tiring. And if it's only service users saying those things, we're a lot more easy to dismiss than if it's an alliance of service users and professionals. So yeah, I think I find it quite difficult to trust people who don't see that, and who will sort of be like, oh well, politics is not really my job, because I don't think you can separate them. Number 2 is not very easy, but it's acknowledge the harm that's sometimes done by the system that you work in. That's if you end up working in the NHS. Obviously, I owe the NHS my life probably about 12 times over at this point, and I know that, and I'm grateful for that most of the time. But I have also been really damaged by some of the treatment that I've had, some of the way that I've been handled when I've been in crisis and I've been taken to A&E by the police, for instance. Some of the experiences I've had in A&E have been horrific. I've been stitched up without anaesthetic. I've been physically restrained by 2 big male security guards when I was no threat to anyone. And that does impact how I engage with other people who are saying they're there to help me, because the police said they were there to help me, the security guards said they were there to help me, the doctor who stitched me up without anaesthetic said he was there to help me. And if my therapist and then the psychologist who I see now hadn't been able to acknowledge that they were part of a system that had really, really hurt me, I wouldn't have been able to move forward. So I think that's very important. And number one, this is my absolute number one bugbear, is don't assume you're entitled to your client's trust. I, less so now, but when I first came into services, I found it really, really difficult to talk. And a lot of the time, I knew that I needed help, but I would end up just sitting in silence. I just couldn't get the words out. And sometimes that's something that people find really difficult to get their heads around, and they'll kind of become quite frustrated and say, oh, well, if you don't talk to me, I can't help you, which to me, that doesn't feel like anything other than an ultimatum, like be helped on our terms or stop wasting our time, basically. But you might know you're there to help me, but not everyone who's said they're there to help me in my life has really been on my side. And that's likely to be the case for most people who've ended up in mental health services. So I think acknowledging that you can see how hard it is for someone if they're not talking, and that it's hard to trust a stranger and to give up your story when that might be the only thing you've ever had ownership over, and the only space you've ever had is how you describe yourself and how you tell your story of who you are and how you've come to be who you are. And to trust someone enough to just pour that out, that doesn't happen just because they're wearing an NHS lanyard. So I think it's really, really important to allow people not to trust you straight away. And in my experience, the people who don't assume that they are entitled to my trust are the ones who I've ended up trusting, and the ones who feel that I'm slighting them by not trusting them are the ones who it generally hasn't been worth trusting. So that's my advice. Not going to be the case for everybody, but those are my experiences.